Late afternoon in Portland, the phone rang. The sound broke the calm. She answered, on screen, a name she knew too well, Oscar Peters. He appeared in a video call, calm, smiling, the same man she trusted. Their messages had promised love, but now trust ended. He confessed by mistake. The account he used, a lifetime of savings gone. Her eyes widened. She stared at the screen. The man she thought would marry her now revealed as a thief. 37 months, a sentence delivered on June 4, 2025. He stole nearly 1.9 million. Every dollar was wired across oceans from a date that never met her in person, all built on lies. But how had he convinced her and so many others to hand over everything? On this call, she heard it all. No warnings, no second chance. Her world shattered. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse later that day. Journalists called it a romance fraud to end all romance frauds. The case struck a nerve. Its reach felt bigger than headlines. He posed as a billionaire, living in Denmark, seeking a wife. They met online, December 2015. Millionaire matchmaker. She thought it was her chance at love. Instead, it was the con of a lifetime. Daily emails, phone calls, promises of marriage, cover stories, frozen accounts, business emergencies, friendly persuasion, all lies. Over 2 years, nearly 1.9 million was sent in small batches, gradually taken, wire by wire. She typed messages asking him to visit, to prove it was real. He replied with new excuses, weather, health, security concerns. Something always got in the way, according to prosecutors. Court documents called it a calculated way to prey, a betrayal at a distance and the first step in a trail that would lead investigators far beyond her case. The impact was immediate and absolute. Her savings are gone, her faith collapsed, loneliness left behind. This wasn't a bank heist, it was a dismantling of trust, piece by piece. And it all began years earlier in a world where Oscar was learning skills no one realized he'd use again. Outside the courtroom, the prosecutor spoke. These scams are incredibly damaging. They don't just cause financial loss, they leave emotional scars, she said. He was led away, handcuffed. No dramatic scenes, but it had already happened, quietly, intimately, from the other side of the world. And now she faced a new reality. Justice was served, but what had been taken would never be returned. She closed her phone. The room darkened. This moment changed everything. Tomorrow would begin the reckoning with how he fooled her, how the lie took root, how it burrowed into her life. Oscar Peters was born in South London in 1979, in a family where money was always tight. His father drove buses, his mother cleaned offices at night. 6 people shared a small council flat, and tensions were constant. As a middle child, Oscar often kept to himself, but school reports show the early cracks: missed homework, slipping grades, and a restlessness that would later make him gravitate toward risk. By 15, Oscar was spending more time with older boys who had cash, cars, and influence. He started running errands, picking up envelopes, delivering packages without asking questions. 2 years later, with no qualifications and no steady job, he left school for low-paid warehouse work, but the lure of quick, untraceable money had already taken hold. A cousin introduced him to deliveries with higher stakes. The packages were now illicit. The amounts were small at first, but the payments were quick. His family noticed the change. New clothes, extra cash. When asked, he brushed it off as helping a friend. It was a pattern that would later echo in his scams, blending trust with concealment and keeping the real source of his income out of sight. What none of them saw was how far he'd take it. In his 20s, Oscar had built a network: dealers, couriers, street sellers. He knew how to blend in, avoid attention, and keep cash moving without leaving a trail. That caution kept him out of custody for years, and it became a skill set he'd later use to hide online transactions in his fraud. As the jobs grew bigger trips, larger sums, he began using others as runners. By 2005, he had his own flat, but even family visits were brief. Too many questions could expose too much. Friends from his old neighborhood said Oscar was generous. He would lend money, buy food, help out if someone was short on rent. But he also had a temper. If someone crossed him, he would cut them off completely. By his 30s, Oscar had built a steady role in the network. He wasn't the boss, but he was trusted with important deliveries. He knew who was in charge and stayed loyal. He avoided unnecessary risks. That kept him moving up. He kept to himself. The few who spoke to him said he was polite, always in a rush. Sometimes they saw him with a suitcase or backpack, never for long. Family gatherings were different. His brothers had stable jobs. His sister was studying. They worried about him. They knew he wasn't working in a normal job, but no one could prove it. He didn't share details. In 2015, when his father passed, Oscar withdrew further from friends but doubled down on his operations. He kept his business running cash deals, discreet meetings, no paper trail. What no one realized, the skills keeping him invisible now would one day help him vanish millions. And when it came to light, it was already too late. Police records show his name had surfaced before, linked to other people under investigation. But there was never enough to charge him. He remained a shadow in the background, always moving, always careful. Those close to him say he wanted to stop. He spoke once to a cousin about one last job, but the money was hard to walk away from. Each delivery brought in more than a month's wage in a regular job. He had no qualifications, no other skills. This was all he knew. Oscar's mother still hoped he would change. She asked him to think about his future. He would nod, promised to think about it, but nothing changed. The streets still called to him. The money still arrived. By 2020, the network he worked for was bigger than ever. Police were already watching. They had started mapping the routes and the people. Oscar didn't know it, but his name was on a list. He wasn't the biggest target, but he was a link in the chain. The family noticed he had started to look tired. Long hours, constant travel. He didn't say where he was going. Sometimes he would be gone for days, then return with bags of cash. Soon, one trip would put him on the radar in a way he could never escape. In late 2021, he stopped coming to family events altogether. His mother worried constantly. His sister said she had a bad feeling. They were right. Things were moving behind the scenes. And soon, his quiet life would be over. Not with a dramatic arrest, but with a single move that would unravel everything. The plan was never perfect. Oscar met most of his contacts through friends of friends. It started with favors, a delivery here, a pickup there. At first, it seemed harmless. He was just moving boxes. He didn't ask questions. He didn't want to know. It was cash in hand, quick, no questions. Then the packages got heavier, the people got sharper, the instructions got specific. Oscar knew they weren't just clothes or electronics. He had an idea of what he was carrying, but he also knew he couldn't back out now. One night, in a small bar off a side street, Oscar was approached by a man called Dale. Everyone knew Dale. He was the type who walked in without asking for a seat. Dale wasn't friendly. He didn't smile. He told Oscar there was work to do. That night, Oscar agreed to something bigger. A run across 2 counties, 1 car, 1 drop-off. It paid more than a month's wage in one trip. That run was smooth, too smooth. The money came in without delay. No one followed him. No one asked him anything, and that silence would turn out to be dangerous. After that, the jobs kept coming. They called him reliable. They said he was quick. He didn't hang around. He didn't open bags. Oscar liked that they trusted him. He told himself he wasn't hurting anyone. He was just a courier. But the network was bigger than he thought. In late spring, he was told to meet a man called Vince. Vince ran a stash house in an industrial area. That's when Oscar saw it for the first time. Tables covered in plastic wrap, bags stacked to the ceiling, weighing scales in every corner. He didn't say a word. Vince didn't offer an explanation. From then on, every trip Oscar made was linked to that place. He drove at odd hours. He avoided the main roads. He learned which petrol stations had cameras and which didn't. It became routine. By summer, Oscar was moving larger amounts, thousands of pounds worth in one boot. But with the bigger runs came bigger risks. In one delivery, Oscar noticed an unmarked car behind him for 2 miles. He changed lanes 3 times. It stayed behind him. His palms were sweating. He turned off into a residential street and sat still. The car drove past. Oscar told himself he was imagining things, but his gut told him it was the police. He mentioned it to Dale. Dale told him to stop talking. "If you think too much, you're done," he said. Oscar shut up. The money blinded him. He had cash to buy things he never dreamed of. A new watch, designer trainers, nights out without looking at the bill. Friends noticed. They asked him how he could afford it. He laughed it off. His mother didn't ask, but she saw it. Things changed when one run went wrong. It was meant to be a quick drop. In and out. When Oscar arrived, the door to the stash house was open. The place had been hit. Bags were missing. Vince was shouting into a phone. "Who knew about this?" Vince kept saying. Oscar froze. If the police had raided it, they would have been waiting. If it was another gang, then someone inside had talked. The tension was immediate. Everyone was on edge. Dale looked at Oscar like he was testing his loyalty. Within days, there were whispers. Someone had followed. Someone had been sloppy. Oscar didn't know if it was him, but the timing was bad. His last drop had been close to the hit. The network tightened. Routes changed. Drop points moved every week. It was exhausting. Oscar was told to carry burner phones, change them every run, destroy the old one. One night, he was called in for a job without warning. It was urgent. No details over the phone. When he arrived, Vince handed him a single package. Small, wrapped tight. He didn't ask what it was. He was told to go now. No delays. Halfway through the run, Oscar's phone buzzed. It was Dale. "We've got a problem," the voice said. "Keep driving. Don't stop for anything." Oscar's heart was pounding. At the same time, another number called, unknown. He didn't answer. That night, he completed the drop. But when he came back, Dale's mood had changed. Vince wouldn't even look at him. Something had shifted. The next day, Oscar noticed two men waiting outside his block. They weren't from the crew. He stayed inside for hours. It was the first time he thought about walking away. But he knew you didn't just leave. By autumn, the police had their eyes on the network. They started searching, looking for details. Found almost everything on him, but Oscar didn't know it. His name was already on their list. He kept driving. He kept earning. He kept his head down. But in the shadows, the case against him was building. And the break wouldn't come from his crew, but from somewhere he never saw coming. If you find stories like this important, consider subscribing for more. The day of the sentencing brought a different kind of silence. It was not the hush of shock or disbelief that had once gripped the community. This was the kind of silence that comes when people know what is coming but still cannot prepare themselves for hearing it aloud. The courtroom was full before the judge entered. Journalists filled the front rows, their notepads ready. Police officers stood along the sides, a visible reminder of the seriousness of the case. Members of the public had queued since early morning. They wanted to see the end of something that had shaken their city. Oscar Peters sat at the dock, his face almost expressionless. He had not spoken much during the trial. Even now, with the weight of his actions fully exposed, he stared straight ahead. The prosecution had already laid out the evidence in earlier days. They had connected the movements, the timeline, the links that left no room for doubt. The defense had done what they could. They spoke about his past, his struggles, and his remorse, but the facts remained fixed. The jury had been unanimous in their decision. The sentencing was the final step. The judge addressed him directly. The words were slow and deliberate, each one measured. They spoke of the impact on the victims, the families, and the wider community. They spoke of the choices that had been made, the risks ignored, and the harm that could not be undone. When the sentence was read, there was no gasp from the room. People had expected it. Peters nodded once, almost as if to himself, and then stood as officers led him away. The emotion broke only after he was gone. Some cried quietly. Others sat frozen, the weight of the testimony still hanging in the air, the mother who said her son no longer felt safe walking home from school, the father who described his daughter waking in the night, restless and afraid. Others spoke of financial strain, medical bills, counseling sessions. The judge had acknowledged every one of these accounts, calling them the real cost of what had happened. Loss that could not be measured in money or in the years of a sentence. But outside the courtroom, parts of the story were still locked away. In the weeks after the sentencing, the streets where Peters had once lived looked different. His old address was avoided by some, pointed out by others. The local shops felt quieter. People still talked about the case, but not in the same heated way as before. Now, the tone was one of reflection, but behind the scenes, investigators were still unraveling details that hadn't yet reached the public. For law enforcement, the case had been one of the most complex in recent years. In the incident room, desks were buried under open case files and printouts, phones ringing in short bursts. A whiteboard stretched across the wall, covered in maps, names, and lines of red string linking addresses. Detectives described sifting through hard drives stacked in evidence bags, replaying grainy CCTV footage frame by frame, searching for one clear image. Coffee cups went cold between calls. Sleep was traded for long nights under fluorescent lights, knowing the whole community was waiting for answers. The prosecution team described it as a case that tested every part of the justice system. There were legal challenges, procedural hurdles, and the constant need to keep the public informed without compromising the investigation. Each stage brought its own risks and left unanswered questions that still trouble investigators today. The sentencing also carried a message. Officials wanted it clear that this level of harm would be met with the strongest legal response. Community leaders echoed that sentiment. They spoke of the need for vigilance, better resources, and stronger support for victims. Not everyone agreed on the outcome. Some felt the sentence was fair. Others believed it could never truly match the scale of the damage. A few argued for a harsher penalty. These differences of opinion were voiced in local meetings and online discussions. Over time, attention began to move to other matters, but the case never fully disappeared from memory. It was referenced in news reports about similar scenes. It was discussed in schools during lessons on safety and responsibility. In some ways, it became a cautionary example. Some families found small ways to honor those impacted. Fundraisers were organized. Memorial walks were held. Local charities benefited from renewed donations. These acts did not erase the loss, but they gave people something to hold on to. Meanwhile, in prison, Peters began his sentence under high security. Reports from inside suggested he kept to himself. He did not seek trouble, but neither did he engage much with others. Officials noted he followed the rules and rarely spoke about his case. There were occasional letters sent to him, though it was not clear if they were from supporters, critics, or people curious about the story. Prison staff confirmed he received visits, but the list of visitors was short. The legal side of the case was not entirely over. There were appeals filed, though none succeeded in overturning the core decision. Each appeal brought the case briefly back into the headlines, but without the same intensity as before. As the years went on, the focus shifted to prevention. Police worked with schools and community groups to address the kind of risks that had led to the corruption. Training sessions were held for local businesses. Youth outreach programs were strengthened. The name Oscar Peters remained in official records, court archives, and the memories of those who had lived through the events. For some, it was a reminder of how quickly harm could spread when a single decision crossed the line into criminal action. In the end, the trial's conclusion marked a point in time, but it did not bring a clean break. The legal outcome was just one part of the story. The real aftermath lived in the daily lives of those who had been touched by the misconduct, in the changes they made, and in the way they looked at the world from that point on. Even years later, when people spoke about the case, it was never just about the man in the dock. It was about the chain of events, the people left to pick up the pieces, and the lasting impact that could not be measured only in years of a sentence. The law had spoken. The record was set. But the human story continued, in the quiet spaces where people still asked themselves why it had happened at all, and whether the full truth had ever really been told.